Hi, Monica.
Hey Bob, how's it going?
I can't complain. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah.
Sorry that we've gotten you up early your time. You're on the Pacific Coast.
Ah.
Yeah, okay. Well, get that out of the way because now we have to actually talk.
Yeah,
Um,
all good, all
so
good.
let me introduce this. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Nonzero newsletter. This is the Nonzero podcast. You're Monica Guzmán, journalist. For a time, you were a columnist at the Seattle Times.
Mhm.
Uh, you are author, and this is what we'll mainly be talking about, author of the book, I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And that book is closely related to your work with a group called Braver Angels, which I guess arose in the aftermath of the the election of 2016. It was originally called Better Angels after
Mhm.
the famous kind of Lincoln phrase, Better Angels of Our Nature. I guess they ran into some trademark problems or something.
Mhm.
But anyway, uh, it's Braver Angels. They do a lot of work with what you call bridging conversations between people on kind of the blue side, so to speak, and the red side. Those, of course, aren't the only kind of bridging conversations, but they're a big one, and that's kind of the context for their work. And your book, before we get into all that, let me just say, you and I have something in common. We both have multiple members of our immediate family who voted for Trump. In my case, it's siblings. In your case, um, it's parents.
Mhm.
And how's that going, first of all? You're still talking to
Yeah.
them?
I mean, yeah. I did Thanksgiving with them a couple weeks before the actual Thanksgiving so that I could anyway, it was a whole family thing, making sure that I could see them. And we talked a bit about the midterms, and I was actually surprised to hear my mother go, Ron DeSantis looks impressive. I had thought for sure there was no way they would vote for anyone other than Trump in 2024. I didn't ask
Oh, really?
my dad, and my guess is that my dad is still firmly behind Trump, but I haven't asked him yet.
So they both voted for him twice.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
And very, in our conversations where we've really gotten into it, and I've challenged them on their support of him, and they've challenged me on, everything I believe. um it's really come across to me very powerfully the reasons that they support him, to the point where I can see the admiration, and I can see the reasons for it. So given that, it's quite powerful. So I don't know if my
and
dad will change his mind or not.
and what are the reasons in a word? Or is it easy to
Yeah,
summarize?
so I mean the ones that stick out as being things that are Trump but not other Republicans are about strength. So for my dad, Trump is akin to the character of House in that show about the diagnostician in the hospital. Do you remember the show?
Yeah, the
Wonderful show
doctor
called
who
House.
who, is he the one who was addicted to painkillers?
Yeah,
That
that
Yeah,
guy.
the doctor. But
Yeah,
he was
so
yeah.
very broken guy, right, in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, but also very, very smart and very driven to save lives, solve puzzles, not a nice guy, breaks every rule in the book, really angers everyone at the hospital he works with, I mean, to a toxic degree,
Mhm.
and that's the way my dad sees Trump, that
It
that that
was in the
he's
service of good
yeah.
in the show. It was in the service of good that that he did all these things.
Yeah, and my
Now
dad thinks it's in the service of good that Trump does what he does too.
Now, one reason it surprises some people, I gather, who hear that your parents voted for Trump is because they are immigrants from Mexico, and I guess they came over when you were a small child. Is that right?
Yep,
Or
I was
yeah,
about 5 or 6. I think I was
hmm
about to turn 6 when we came over. Mhm.
okay. Um, and I gather is part of the answer you give people. Well, maybe it's not, but it is a fact that your parents kind of defy the stereotype of immigrants from the South, right? In the sense that they were middle class, well educated to begin with.
Yep. Yes,
Does,
definitely.
uh, go ahead. I
Yeah,
is that
and
that's related to the fact you think that they voted for Trump or
I don't know. Well, there's a lot of good nuanced conversations lately about Latinos and their political affiliation. I
Mhm.
think that back in 2016, the left in particular had some really flat assumptions about the Latino population. And
Right.
in the intervening years, I think it's gotten more complicated and more accurate that this is a large group of people that's extremely diverse. So whether it has to do with class or not, I
Mm.
wouldn't venture to say. I think that up and down the class divide, there are Latinos who would be Republican for very different reasons. But for my dad on the subject of immigration, which is the one that came up a lot after the 2016 election, when I tell people that my parents voted for Trump and they would give me, super shocked faces and ask me why. Um,
Mhm.
my dad, the way he sees it, well, actually, it's a story from his youth that I talk about in the book that really stuck out to me, which was that his father um, always paid his taxes on time, and in Mexico, and at a certain point, in a certain way, that's sort of optional, right? Like there's things you can get away with.
What a great country.
Right? So my dad watched his father's friends make fun of him for
Hmm.
following rules he didn't have to, on that principle. Like, why would you have that principle, You can get away with it. And so my dad saw that as being really noble and really upstanding. So he looked to the United States as a country that enforces its laws, a country that you can't cheat, and he really liked that. So he aspired to move to the United States one way or another, and he managed to do it, in his 20s, um, or maybe no, early 30s, and was really
Mhm.
proud of that. So he cares deeply about the U.S. enforcing its laws, including on immigration. And when he came over with us, he filled out all the paperwork, he waited in all the lines. So he does not identify with people who won't do that.
Mhm. Okay. Now let me ask you a question about, well, certainly very much related to the book and to Braver Angels. I would say the book is largely, not entirely, but largely a guide for people who have decided that they want to at least make the effort to have a conversation across a divide. And it's kind of a good how-to manual at the end of most chapters. There are kind of tips and things. Uh but there's also the problem of people who don't and it's a big problem, I think, who don't feel it's worth the effort to even think about crossing the divide. Is it is it possible to say, like, what is the most common problem at that level with people who aren't even, ready to commit to the project that, say, Braver Angels is about, if that makes sense?
The biggest problem at that level with folks who would see that big barrier in front of them, is that what you mean?
Yeah, who would, like, slam the door in your face, so to speak,
Ah,
metaphorically, if you walked up to them and said, "Hey, wanna take a trip and go talk to some Trump supporters or wanna go talk to some
mm,
Biden supporters?" They'd be like, "It's hopeless," or whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Those people are hopeless or
yeah,
whatever. You know,
yeah. There's
what kind of
several there's
okay.
several things. One is, folks who believe that, talking across the divide, particularly the divide that you're mentioning, from blue to the red to the deep red to the Trump supporting red. One divide is folks whose identities, it feels like their identities keep them from doing that in a way that would not be harmful. So they believe I'm black, I'm gay, I'm this or that thing that Trump supporters must hate. So that's
Mhm,
one. Another is hopelessness. They're too far gone, they're too extreme, and I've heard I want to spend my energy where I can make an impact. So I can't make an impact there, forget it. Another, I think, is people who are on their own extreme, just on the other end, who believe that the only way to engage the other side is war.
mm,
So since we're not in a kind of war where we kill each other, we'll do the next best thing, which is shame and distance each other and try to just beat each other at elections, but definitely not actually talk to them because they're just pure evil. So there's that. I think there's for a lot of people, whether it's blatant or not, the idea is that they're either crazy, stupid, or evil, and for those reasons, just not worth engaging. And this happens absolutely on both sides, by the way. But because I'm blue, I'm more familiar with that sort of attitude, toward reds, I suppose.
mhm. The, and is I mean, does Braver Angels just decide to basically deal with people who have decided to try to talk, or is there also a kind of an effort to just elicit some kind of initial interest in the
Oh,
project?
definitely, definitely. I personally don't think that the larger mission really works, without pulling everyone in at least a little. So I think
Mhm,
there's a persuasive case to be made across the political divide, no matter how partisan you are or how convicted to your opinions. One huge misconception about, Braver Angels, but the larger bridging movement is that it's really a movement to come to the middle. That
mhm,
this is really about compromise at the expense of your convictions and your beliefs. That if you're deep red or deep blue, what we want is to make you a lighter shade of red, a lighter shade of blue. And
mhm.
that's a horrible misconception because if that were what we wanted, it would be doomed from the start. If
Right.
that were what we thought worked, it obviously wouldn't. That's not where this democracy is headed. Instead, and my friend Manu Meal, who's the CEO of an organization called Bridge USA, speaks to this really, really well. This is about temperament. This is about arguing for your opinions in a way that they will actually be heard. This is about making persuasion effective again. And I would
Mhm,
say at the moment, a lot of the deepest partisans are not being persuasive at all. They think they are, but when they attack
yeah.
the other side the way that they do, they just make everything worse and they don't realize it. But there are ways to engage with people on the other side where you're understanding them, they're understanding you, you connect on a certain plane, and then the insights that you have to offer each other actually make a dent. But you have to get there. And what's stopping a lot of people from getting there is animosity, is this idea that those people suck. And so
Mhm.
you believe that you're never even going to approach them and you're not going to see what's sort of pretty clear, which is that only by approaching can we persuade.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more, effective things I've found in talking to people on my side, which is pretty much the blue side, is to say that, you know, the anger is playing into Trump's hands.
Mhm.
To offer it initially as tactical advice, which I think it is, and I think that's you could probably make the same case to people on the red side, although uh, I do it less, because they're kinda not in my tribe, but I think it's also true. Certainly, the Democrats going into the midterms acted as if they thought they could, exploit, the perception that the other side was
Oh, yeah.
so angry that they're determined to subvert democracy and so on.
Yep.
So, I mean, is that a big part of your opening pitch is that, "Look, you're not even you may not even be serving your own cause
Mm.
if you don't work harder to understand the others."
Yes, yes. The opening pitch, I'm not sure. I think it's a little more like the second or third thing because it's a tough thing for people to want to see sometimes, if they're
What is
if
the
they're pretty
opening pitch,
partisan.
if there is a single opening pitch?
Hmm. Well, that's so interesting. I I mean, there's several, but I think a big thing is where everyone agrees. Everyone across the political spectrum agrees that we are broken in the way that we talk to each other. Our politics is
Mhm,
broken. Our media is broken. The narratives that we're hearing are missing a lot. Everyone agrees on this, right? From the deepest conservatives to the deepest liberals and progressives. That's where you begin. It's just like there's got to be a better way, y'all. Like this isn't working. So from there, I think it's then touching on what I think most people sense is that our fear of each other or our certainty that the other side is irredeemable is keeping us from seeing something more real and complicated that we would see if we were to approach. Um, and then there's the stories and models of when that happens and good things result. So it's up and down, but I do think that one of the strongest arguments to make really is about if you are the deepest, most partisan activist, you want to be engaging across the divide in a healthy way. You
mhm.
do. Because if what you want to do is change the world, then what you want to do is either, either or both persuade the other side to see things a little more your way, because you think it's the better way, and you might be right. Uh, but also, you know, advocate for your side and fight the other side in an effective way. And as long as we are hyper polarized like this, all that's going to happen is that the parties are going to trade power and undo each other's stuff. That doesn't add
Yeah.
up to much. That doesn't actually
Mm,
change culture. It doesn't change us. So it's just not sustainable no matter who you are. Like you could have the biggest success in your movement in this one silo, but then you can't get beyond that silo. So,
mhm,
you're just building your own reality while everyone marches off in a different direction, and that just doesn't play out well.
uh-huh. Let me ask you this question. There's a part in the book when I think it's, you're heading toward one of these bridge building exercises. There's a big one you spend a lot of time on called Melting Mountains, where you kind of, I guess, get on a bus or something and head west and have an encounter with, uh, people who are largely from a rural area, I guess, and kinda trend red. Um, and I think it's in reflecting on that, I may be wrong, but there's some point where you say, I realized going in, what I was thinking about was, how can I make them understand my point of view? And I wasn't thinking so much about how can I better understand theirs. And,
Mhm.
it seems to me this is a kind of a natural, close to universal human, bias that, we want to make our point of view understood. That's part of wanting to persuade people,
Mhm.
that we're right, which we all naturally,
Mhm.
want to do. And I guess it's inherently a big problem. Uh, but that said, in other words, having agreed that kind of everybody does this to some extent. One thing I wondered while reading the book is, i- in your experience in both kind of red America and blue America, so to speak, to oversimplify, does one side feel more misunderstood than the other? Because I have a guess that I would make about this, but I may be wrong. Is there an asymmetry in terms of the extent to which, the tribes kind of feel that the problem is that they're not understood by the other?
Yes and no, and here's why. Writ large, no. I think that both sides have, you know, reasons to think that they're the ones being misunderstood the most. But where it really matters is on the micro level. So if there's someone who's liberal in a very conservative family or very conservative town surrounded by conservatives, they're going to be the ones who in their own lives are going to feel like the most misunderstood. And so if one of their conservative relatives finally in their view starts getting curious and asking them questions, that isolated liberal is not suddenly immediately going to reciprocate. They're going to think, "Oh my gosh, I finally have a chance to be heard." And they're going to talk their relative's ear off. And there's a lot of situations where it happens on the other side. And it's from that other side that it's because I'm blue, I hear from a lot of people who are blue going, conservatives aren't curious. I've talked to them, I've asked them questions, and they don't ask me any questions back. And what I caution is not to assume that that's the case. I think that there's a lot of blues who assume that reds are less curious. But I think that it is this asymmetry born more on the micro level and on the individual relationship level, and it comes from the fact that sure we want to understand, but mostly we want to be understood. I don't think that there is a person who wants to understand more than be understood at their heart. So,
Mhm.
understanding takes a little more effort than wanting to be understood. So when you come together with somebody else, you're not just talking to each other, you're talking to the labels that you give each other, you know? In some cases if this is the only conservative you've talked to in months, then you're piling on to that one human being everything you see on Fox News. That's not fair. But because you're doing that, you're going to want to demand that they understand you before you understand them. And this is part of what's at the impasse. I think when we come together is we expect reciprocity. But I think we can be sort of empathetically acknowledging that there's asymmetry, but that we can't predict what the asymmetry is. The conservative you talk to, the liberal you talk to, you don't know how unheard they feel. You don't know what bucket they're putting you in. But what you want is to get into the kind of relationship where you're just seeing each other as individual people instead of representatives of a larger block. because that's
Mhm.
mostly what we do in these discursive spaces like social media, where we're not really people. I always say the internet is a non place that makes us into non people. So when we talk to a person on social media, we're not really talking to a person, we're talking to a whole ideology. and
Mhm.
and that's a high bar, right? So yeah, the asymmetry writ large, I think, doesn't exist and doesn't matter. It's the asymmetry at the micro level that matters, because it's people want to be understood in the moment. If I was understood yesterday by a conservative, it doesn't matter. I'm talking to a
Mhm.
different conservative today, and I want to be understood by them today. So those demands can be barriers.
Yeah, and I guess a symptom of the problem we have is how automatically when we encounter someone we've never encountered before, we try to put them in one tribe or another. I mean, if I
Mhm.
imagine getting on an airplane, 40 years ago, of course, this was also back when people didn't have earbuds, so they would be more inclined to talk to each other to begin with on an airplane. That used to happen. But anyway, of course, you're trying to figure the person out. You're trying to locate them in a certain sense, but it wouldn't have been the case that the first location I want to do is figure out whether they voted for Trump. And that
Right.
really is kind of it now. I
Yeah.
mean that's how intense and toxic things have gotten, and I guess part of your mission is kind of one mind at a time try to create an environment where that is less automatic, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that that's the simple place where this other approach begins, which is just see each other as people. Just start with that, because it is more honest, it is accurate,
Mhm.
and it gets you off of the team sport tribal dynamics that poison our conversations. And this does happen to all of us. It's not, in a big way, it's not really our fault. Like this is the dynamics of the world we're in. It's our choice whether we want to fight back against those dynamics.
And what kinds of things, do the job of persuading the other person that you're a person? Of course, you're not literally they know you're a person, so it's not quite the epiphany that you're a Homo sapien, but,
Mhm.
um, what, are there kinds of is it like, "Oh, you too have a daughter that you worry about,"
Mhm.
or, what are the most, common, if this makes sense,
Mhm.
points of contact that help do this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think of 3 off the bat. One is communicate with each other in person, or at least with voice, or on video. Communicating with each other, especially strangers, just via text on social media is just not a way you're gonna see each other's humanity very easily. It's just not. The other is what you mentioned, just points of commonality. I do this curiosity workshop based on tactics in the book. And, inevitably people will bring up, well, in your book, in part one, you talk about how we're divided and how it's sort of human nature to be siloed and othering and sorting, to be around those with whom we're comfortable. And so I say, it's true that we are built to divide, but we're also built to connect. And in the workshop, we demonstrate that together in a way, because I have them ask each other questions just in a pair of strangers, and I have them not comment on the other's answers. And somebody will always raise their hand after that exercise and say, "It was really hard for me not to say, oh, my daughter went to that school too," or "Oh, I've been to that country," or "Yeah, that's also my favorite dish." So we want to make connections. We are built to do that because it is an evolutionary social survival technique that has been built over millennia for human beings. We want to connect. So yeah, finding points of commonality is amazing. But I'd say the single most powerful thing is to not talk about opinions, but rather to share stories that
Hmm,
illustrate and illuminate our opinions. So when you
hmm,
share a personal experience or a story about how a concern or a dilemma, has landed in your life, there's actually research that shows that that's a far more people are far more able to understand where you're coming from, right? If you tell it as a story instead of a bunch of logical reasons, as if we're all robots evaluating things that way. We're not all robots evaluating things that way. We are
hmm.
biographies. We are walking, we trail our entire histories behind us, and that's how we view the world. So yeah, so whenever I approach somebody and I know that, wow, we have really different lives, it's gonna be interesting. Let's see how we can connect. I don't think of revealing my opinion as sort of like, well, it is this. Instead I go, well, let me tell you about something that happened. that makes it
Mhm.
easier to understand why I fall on this side of
Mhm.
something. It's kinda like when
So
you asked me about my dad, and I told you the story about him watching his dad be made fun of by
mhm.
his friends. It's like it's the same idea. It's like we understand each other better when we hear a story.
Right. So you're steering them when you tell stories, you're steering them away from, just recognizing that you have a different opinion about an issue, and there are certain arguments for that side of, like, some policy question, toward recognizing that you have your reasons, right?
Right,
There are
right.
reasons in your life that you have this position. I mean, those are 2 very different things, and it's understanding that people have their reasons that tends to warm people up, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. There's a quote, in the book by Blaise Pascal, old French philosopher, but he says that the heart has reasons that reason does not know.
Uh-huh.
So when we speak in the language of logic, sometimes there's things we can't capture. There's things we feel or sense that are still kind of burning and hot inside us, and they might those feelings, if we those senses, if we can't communicate them, we will feel unheard, which keeps
Mhm.
us from hearing, right? And so they'll become barriers unless we find some way to share them. And the best way I know of is to just tell that story as you're thinking about that sense, that feeling, that concern, that hot thing in your heart. See what images come to mind and try to talk about those.
Mhm.
Whatever memory, whatever thing comes up, try to share that and you'll be surprised the other person might at least kind of understand a little bit like where you're coming from. So that piece I think is really important. The heart has reasons that reason does not know. So if all we do is talk in the language of reasons, we'll never get to those reasons that reason has not articulated yet and doesn't know how to. And that's I think how we grow as a culture. A lot of times as things seem to shift, which they have been in the last 10 years in this country and frankly around the world, all kinds of norms being uplifted and changed and overthrown and all this stuff. I have sensed, I don't know if you have, a sort of lack of ability to articulate what's happening. And I think of it as a sort of adolescence. Something is changing in our society, but it change like we sense it before we can speak it. And so in that adolescence, it's like a teenager yelling at their mom all the time. You don't get it. You don't get it. And we don't have the language to communicate, right? So the language will come. And I think that the first language is story.
Okay. Now there's another reasons quote that I think is in your book, and it's associated with a movie. It may be that some director said it, it may be
Oh
in a
yes.
movie, and it's
I
something
love it.
like it's something about how, in a way, horrifying it is when you
Mhm.
realize that everyone has their reasons, because that
Yes.
includes people who disagree with you. It includes people who do terrible things, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
everyone has their reasons. What is
Yeah, it's
you may
it's
not
it's
remember it
from
word for word,
yeah.
but you
No, 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 it's
have a
it's
better
from the
idea than I
movie,
do.
it's from the movie, oh my god, why can't I think of it? The Rules of the Game, Les Règles du Jeu, which is a classic French movie by Jean Renoir. It's wonderful. Yeah, and it's a line that says, "The truly terrible thing is this: everyone has their reasons. La chose effroyable, c'est que tout le monde a ses raisons." Um, yeah, and it's I think it's remarkable because once you realize everyone has their reasons, you can no longer believe that people who do things you think are bad are crazy. They
Right.
have their reasons too.
And have you noticed that you run into this problem if you try to explain to your tribe why the other tribe does things? I mean, it's even worse if you go further and try to explain why some mass murderer did it. But let's just say you're
Mhm.
talking to Blue Tribe about Trump supporters, and you start explaining the reasons, and people say, "Oh, so you're justifying it? Oh, so you're
Mhm.
defending it." It seems to me that this is one of the biggest problems in all of this is the intuition that I mean, this is another French saying that to know all is to forgive all. To
Mhm.
understand everything
Mhm.
about why somebody did something is to give them a kind of a free pass,
Mhm.
and people don't want to kind of forgive you, so to speak, for opinions they find abhorrent, much less for horrible crimes and so on. I mean, is that a
Yeah.
big
I love that you're bringing this up because I've been obsessed in the last few months with what I think of as barriers. You kind of opened this conversation with asking about that. What's in people's way, and you're helping me in my head articulate a barrier that maybe I haven't articulated so much, which is that we all want accountability. We want accountability for the actions that we take that lead our world to a worse place, in our view, and we want people to take responsibility for those actions, and we want to make sure that that responsibility is consistently socially enforced, right? So that means if someone starts to tell us an empathetic story of someone whose beliefs we believe led to something bad, we don't want to hear it. And we believe that that person telling that story is weakening our case for accountability and our ability as a society to hold each other accountable for these things. Um, I think this is super compelling and really, really interesting. As a journalist, who has so many times interviewed people who have done unsavory things, right? Like I interviewed, you mentioned a murderer, right? I went to Texas and I talked to someone who was convicted of murdering two cab drivers for petty cash, and then I watched him die 2 weeks later. Um,
Mm.
so did I talk to him thinking it is excusing his behavior to understand his childhood, to understand his family, to understand the path he has walked? No. And if it were true, right, that witnessing each other's stories somehow excuses our behavior, imagine everything we wouldn't know, right? Like all the ways that we wouldn't learn about ourselves as people by hearing about other people's stories. I mean, we do this in our fiction all the time. Imagine if we couldn't do it in our nonfiction. Our fiction wouldn't exist because we wouldn't even know the stories. I I just find it a little bit ludicrous, this idea. Now, the point about accountability and responsibility is a really interesting one. We do want to hold everybody accountable. The thing is, we need to have all the variables. And I think a lot of times we sort of smugly walk around like, well, I've read 5 thought pieces, really good ones by great columnists with a lot of statistics, and those tell me everything I need to know about why these people voted this way. And I've got them. I understand them. I know everything I need to know. The other day I saw a meme or a photo of a poster at a protest that said something like, oh gosh, what was it? Um, it's not that everyone who voted for Trump is racist. It's that for everyone who voted for Trump, racism is not a deal breaker. Now, what a challenging statement, right? What a challenging statement. And what I would say to that poster is, for you, it might seem like, that piece, that racism that you see is everything. It colors the entire formula or calculation in these other people's minds. But if you go and talk to them, they have concerns. Like you have a very high concern about racism, and you should. That's a worry. It's a big one, But go and talk to them, and you will find other concerns that you may not share that are extremely important to them. And those may also be really good concerns. So unless you go and approach them, you won't see those. And so you'll believe like 2 + 2 = 4. These people are evil. But if you're not even collecting all the variables, if you're sitting there thinking that you know everything you need to know and you haven't even engaged, that to me is the biggest tragedy. Judging each other more while engaging each other less makes no
Mhm.
sense. People are mysteries. We cannot be explained in a statistic or a thought piece. And I'm done with the world that thinks that that's enough, you know.
Mhm. Okay, so I haven't actually given you a chance to talk about the book per se much. So why don't you just talk a little about the kinds of guidance you're giving, the kinds of tips you're giving, the kinds of maybe specific barriers these things are designed to break down.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mentioned that in the first part of the book, I talk about how we got here. So just 1/5 of the book is why are we so polarized, basically, and it's this framework about SOS that we're sorting, we're othering, and we're siloing. Then I talk about curiosity as a brain, as a cognitive ability. It's fantastic. It's really, really cool. We're all capable of it. It's a practice, and like a muscle, it gets stronger the more that you do it. Coming into conversations across disagreement, one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves is, what am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? Um, Another thing that leads to is we'll always have assumptions and judgments of each other before we've really heard each other out. So instead of those judgments just sort of subconsciously, you know, leading us in a certain direction, what we can do is turn those judgments into questions. So as we approach somebody and go, oh, they just think this because of this, we can go, do they think that because of this? How can I ask? Right? And so that's really the whole book is about getting curious. It's about the power of curiosity. I heard the other day someone I really admire, talk about curiosity as something very selfish, and I bristled at that a bit. And what he meant was when you're curious, it's a selfish thing because you're just enriching yourself. But to
Mhm.
me, and again, I've been a journalist a long time. I've interviewed a lot of people and I've seen them light up because somebody cares. Somebody wants to hear their story. Curiosity is caring. Curiosity, the gift of your interest, is a really profound gift. You can give it to your friends, you can give it to your family, you can give it to a lot of people. So curiosity is not selfish, I don't think.
Mhm.
And the way that you can be curious about people, there's two really powerful questions I talk about in the book that tend to not be judgmental. And instead, what they do is they gather information, they gather those variables you're not seeing, they tell you what you're missing. So that then you can get curious. You can see what else do I need to know? Where's the gap between what I know and what I want to know, and keep asking questions. And those two types of questions are questions of experience. How did you come to believe what you believe? That type of question, not why, which gets to reasons. We talked about this, but stories, but experiences. Tell me the how. And
Mhm.
then the other really powerful type of non judgmental question is, what are your concerns? What are you afraid of when it comes to abortion or the conversation around climate or gun regulations or guns in schools? What most concerns you? What do you hope for? And when you ask about concerns, you end up having conversations about values. So we go into that quite a bit in the book. And then finally, there's a deep dive on making sure that in your conversations, people can actually be honest, because curiosity is not very useful if people are holding back so much that they're just telling you like copies of what everybody else says and they're not being real. So you want to make sure that people feel comfortable and secure, secure in, oh, this is a person who could actually hear me, and
Mhm.
being received is extraordinarily effective. I'm right now really getting into research on intellectual humility, and it turns out that there's studies that show that even if all you do is bring to mind, just think of someone in your life who tends to receive your ideas well, not agree with you, but receive your ideas well, you'll become more
Mhm.
intellectually humble. You'll be able to hear different perspectives.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I had never really focused on the curiosity thing, as a barrier here. I mean, I've thought a lot about what the problems are along the tribal divide, so to speak, and I had never kind of thought of it as like curiosity is this
Mm,
generally very enticing thing. It's like you're really driven to be curious in certain realms, but with certain kinds of people, you're not. And the reason is, once you've decided they're in the enemy tribe, you actually want
yeah.
them to fit a certain description. You want to be able to say they have
Yes.
X, Y, and Z motivation. And so you
Exactly.
actively resist challenge to the narrative that your tribe wants to sustain. Now, you mentioned that for you, your experience in journalism played a role in, I guess, kind of maybe the cultivation of your curiosity, or at least
Hmm.
the way you pursue it. And I know what you mean. I spent at a young age a couple of years at a small newspaper, just every day writing like multiple stories, calling people, so on. I very much identify, by the way, with your the terror you initially felt as a
Oh,
reporter at even calling someone and asking them questions. I mean, I remember sitting at the desk, like just not being able to summon up the courage to make the call.
yeah.
But anyway, so it's very good therapy in a lot of ways, I think, to be a journalist. But one
Yes.
one of them really is, uh, well, tell me if you had this, uh, if being a journalist helped you realize the extent to which your initial take on almost anything is going to be wrong
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah,
at
that's
best egregiously oversimplified,
absolutely
right?
100%. There were so many times where I thought, "I know exactly what the story's gonna be, I just need to go and get a quote," you know?
Yeah,
And somebody just sort of surprised me and delighted me with, "Whoa, wait, what? Like, where is this coming from?" And there's a piece of their story I didn't anticipate, and the entire story's just completely different from what I
yeah.
expected. And I talked the other day with somebody who for a podcast who is also a journalist, and he shared a story about how he became a journalist. And I realized we connected on something that I hadn't articulated, which is that for him and for myself, once you have interviewed somebody or learned something about their story and discovered something really meaningful and surprising, and it feels very valuable and true, you feel this extraordinary obligation to share it and to share it responsibly and well. And that was one of the most fun things. That is one of the most fun things about being a journalist is that delight in discovering some piece of somebody's story that's so resonant,
Mhm.
that you just cannot wait to share it. In his case, it was a story he reported in a small town where he was a reporter as a young man, and there was a person who, an old man who would not sell his house so that the town could build a new highway. And so his editor said, go talk to this guy. And, for the first long time in their conversation, there was no reason that was coming out. But then the man shared this story about being in like World War II or in I think so, and then being on a boat that was crossing the Panama Canal, and how he got out in the middle of the night when everyone else was in their really tight bunks to watch that moment happen. And anyway, there was a moment in that story that clicked for the reporter, like, "This is why you won't leave home. This is why you won't leave home." Anyway, and once he had seen that story, he knew why. He knew why this guy was not gonna sell his house, and he couldn't wait to tell the community because he
Mhm.
knew, like, they will understand this better. They won't just judge this guy for standing in the way of progress or whatnot. They will see themselves in him.
Yeah.
Anyway, and every time that happens out there when we're discovering each other, when we're being journalists, like, journalism is so cool, right? I mean, the storytelling institution of our world, it's so important. It's really fraught right now, and there's issues, big ones, but when it's done right, when it's done right, it's in the service of everybody's understanding of each other.
Yeah. But I remember as a journalist sometimes resisting the acknowledgement of complexity, much the way you might in kind of in thinking about the blue or red tribe, just in the sense that, like, you call the first person, they got their perspective, it works as a story, and you could write the story, and then you realize you get some glimmer that there's actually this other perspective out there, somebody who disagrees with them, and you're like, oh shit, now I got to call somebody else. I hate calling people,
Mhm.
and it's there is that parallel with there is often an incentive to simplify, but I agree about how valuable, much for this reason, the experience can be. I mean, honestly, if we could somehow make everyone in the world spend a year as a reporter
Yeah.
at a community
Oh,
newspaper or something,
what a
be
great
great.
idea. That's a
Yeah.
really good idea. Oh
Instead
my
of putting them in the
gosh.
army or something, have them do this.
Yes, I love that. You also, as you were talking, I flashed back to working at the Houston Chronicle as a cops reporter when I was just starting out, which was terrifying to me because I was so new to it and there was so much I didn't know and I wasn't confident about. But I remember having to write the police blotter, right? So really, 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 really short, uh, tiny, like paragraph or two. Like this happened, there was a homicide, blah blah blah, and and I would need to call sometimes the next of kin, for some kind of, I don't know. It was heart-wrenching. And I would hear stories, real stories about real people, but I couldn't put it in the blotter.
Yeah.
Like the editors would be like, "No, Monica, you're doing it wrong. You can't
Hmm.
we just tell us what block of Hartford Avenue it was on
Right.
and, what the medical examiner said." And I'm like, "But these are real people who died."
Yeah.
And oftentimes in communities that get completely overlooked.
Yeah.
So there's been a reckoning in journalism about that. But yeah, it's like there is this hunger, right? There's this hunger to tell people's stories.
Now you mentioned that journalism has its problems. Uh, there's an argument that the whole era of polarization, intense red blue conflict has made it worse, including some of our great newspapers. I won't name
Definitely.
names, but is that your sense that
Yes.
in what ways has it gotten worse?
100%. Well, those institutions of media and politics are completely connected. They are mirrors of us. And so I don't see the origin of the problem being within media. I see it being within us. I think other people would disagree, but that's how I see it. I think journalism is full of people who are extremely well intentioned and want to tell responsible stories to their community that informs things well. But journalists are also full of human beings who are just as vulnerable. In fact, I would argue more vulnerable to the skewing effects of polarization and the animosity behind polarization as anyone else. Why? Because journalists spend a lot of time on social media. That's one big reason.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of journalists are on Twitter because they have to be, and there's been this community that's risen on Twitter where you're almost like talking to each other, right? And it gets a little harder to talk to the communities you represent, and like there's work to try to correct for that. But because journalists always have to be in the news, they always have to, be in these spaces where people are yelling at each other. Honestly, I think journalists have an elevated sense of anxiety. And the idea is that we're, plugged in and that we're keeping tabs on everything. But I think that part of what's skewing everything so much is our fear and our anxiety. It's the emotion that we give. It's how those emotions impact and form narratives about where we are as a society. And
Mhm.
so all those journalists are writing stories with more heat that may not be justified, and narratives that are more certain about good and evil that may not be nuanced enough. And so I think that's
Mhm.
happening a lot. And again, it's not quote unquote their fault, just like it's not in a lot of ways our fault that we are in these toxic places. But again, it's their choice and it's our choice to take steps to get out of that, to correct the projections in our minds, to make sure that we're not just embracing a narrative of good and evil, because I think that's one of the problems in journalism. Embracing a narrative of good and evil that colors all of our stories and makes it extremely hard for people to really understand their neighbors. And if we can't do that, we're going to fall apart.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that narrative sells, and I mean, they have the data, they know what headlines people click on, and people click on the more
Oh
tribalized.
yeah,
So
definitely.
so is it your view, although you are, in you're blue on balance, is it your view that this has led to what is alleged in Red America, that at elite media institutions, at least, there is a clear liberal bias, or kind of a clear anti-Trump and
Oh,
anti-Trumpism bias?
totally. Yeah. I mean, it'd be so hard to argue that that weren't the case. But I would say, I mean, it precedes Trump by a lot, and it's not malevolent. It's not malevolent
Mhm,
at all. I think that for a long time, conservative media has been a reactionary thing. Its whole identity is to be reactionary, which is
mhm,
why on a lot of right leaning media you see that, like, their stories will be a college said this, a college professor said that, the New York Times wrote this, and we're
mhm,
gonna we're gonna take issue with that. So it's for a long time been a reactionary thing, and in a way, when you look at the dynamics of liberal conservative at their real core, you know, the progressive liberal side is about what can we change, and the conservative side is about what ought to be preserved. And both those
mhm,
questions are extremely important for responsible change. So oftentimes our culture, leans into the liberal piece really strongly. Um, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of folks in influential places in our culture are liberal. And so we lean into things like that really quickly, and conservatives go, hang on, what? What is this? Whatever happened to this and this and this? And so we end up yelling at each other. But yeah, I think that that precedes Trump, and it's a very interesting dynamic, and it might even be a dynamic that's healthy. I don't know. And so for our media to play out those dynamics is not the problem.
mhm.
I think the problem is far more when we deny nuance that actually exists, when we decide that a group of people is just evil and bad and not to be listened to. That's when I think we betray the core principle of journalism, which I believe is to be curious. Absolutely be
Mhm.
curious. We have to contend with each other all the time. So let's not embrace too easily, an ideology that oversimplifies.
Okay. Now, you said earlier that part of the advice you give people is like spend less time, communicating via social media and text and so on. Have real conversations in person, where you see the person, and so on. Much of the book is pitched to people who want to have real conversations of this kind, complete with
Mhm.
visual cues. Um, at the same time, more and more, for better and worse, communication isn't in that form. And
Yeah.
also, I would think, that is kind of the Braver Angels model, I gather. You get people together, they talk, they understand. One question is like, well, it's two related questions. Aren't you kind of swimming against the tide?
Mm.
And, and how scalable is that? I mean, there's one study
Yeah.
you report that says that, well, if they study the effects of a Braver Angels encounter and say, well, if you scale this up, if everyone had this experience in America, it would make up for 50% of the polarization that's happened since,
Yeah.
19 whatever or something. But that's a challenge, right? How scalable is it? And, especially in a world where technology seems to be drawing us into other forms of discourse.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that scalable, and that is a challenge for sure. It's extremely impactful. Social media, it's not that it's impossible to have these kinds of conversations on social media, but it is a lot harder. And the reason is everything that gets communicated silently, in terms of goodwill and trust and connection, when there's video and voice or when you're in person, has to somehow get translated into words, and we don't know how to do that very well. That's not that's we haven't had to develop that skill. Conversation is a really sophisticated thing that we all do. It's extraordinarily sophisticated, and we don't really think about that, the skills that we've had to develop. So going into social media is we're children again, and we
Mhm,
we have to start from scratch. How do you communicate on social media the goodwill that you might feel? And you probably have noticed, most people have. You go onto social media, you read something that you don't quite like, and you read it to yourself in a voice that's more aggressive probably than the person
hmm,
intended. I have
mhm,
misunderstood people via text so many times because I hear not with the voice that they used because I have no access to it, but rather with the voice I'm using. I don't like what they
right,
have to say, so I'm going to apply some bad assumptions that aren't even there. And so we
right,
do that constantly to each other. Now, as far as the scalability, Braver Angels acknowledges this. We have a workshop called Skills for Bridging the Divide on Social Media. It's an
mhm,
e-course. It takes about 20 minutes, so it's there, and it's there by popular demand, and it's really good. But do we think that people are all millions of people are going to take it and then everything's going to be fine? No. Uh,
mhm,
Social media has obviously extraordinary benefits: asynchronous communication, scalable communication beyond geographic bounds. Being able to talk to a community of strangers who might rush to your aid, or to your support on some idea is really cool. There's a lot of
mhm,
really cool things about it. So nothing against social media on that front. I think the answer is more change the ratio. Spend time on social media, but if you're spending too much time on social media, can you change the ratio? Can you have more of your conversations in person? Even if they're
mhm,
just conversations with yourself, even if you're just kind of reflecting a little bit in solitude,
a
that's probably
and
better.
okay. Now I know you gotta go in a minute, but one
Yeah.
more question at least. The is the experience of Braver Angels that when they, use their techniques of, the specific cues and so on that seem to work to foster real communication in real life, that when they use them, uh, online with, like, Zoom conversations and stuff, I assume they've experimented with that,
Oh yeah, lots.
that they're effective there. In other words, that online can be a very effective medium for face to face progress.
Absolutely. In fact, during the pandemic, uh, one of our signature programs, Braver Angels Debates, grew by leaps and bounds, and I think it's going to stay virtual. The Zoom Braver Angels Debates that bring together hundreds and hundreds of people from all across the country to talk about very divisive issues in a way that they can really understand each other's perspectives. Those are extraordinary. Like they've driven me to tears. They've been nuts, like so fun and so good. And yeah, it's hard to get such a diverse group of people from all different parts of the country into one room. It's a lot trickier to do that. So yeah, a lot of our programs are virtual. I think that Zoom is an extraordinary technology. The fact that you see my face and my gestures, and you hear my voice and my tone, and you see my smiles and my giggles, that goes a long way. It goes a really, really long way to how we can express ourselves, and see even the fact that we can see each other's living rooms or offices, or that I think is awfully humanizing. I think it's really, really cool. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a lot of gifts that technology has given us, and Braver Angels has taken advantage for sure.
Okay. Anything else you want to say about the book before we sign off? Aside from buy it.
Yeah. Yeah, check out, my website, moniguzman.com. It has a lot more information and other kinds of links and things. Um, But yeah, I mean, what I'm out to do is help to build a world that sees itself. To me, a more
Mhm.
curious world is a world that sees itself, that's able to open its eyes. And even when it's really scary, when we're
Uh,
in when we're watching a scary movie, we cover our eyes. But can we open them? And can this be a world that sees
mhm.
itself? And I really hope so.
Okay. And with all due acknowledgement of the limitations of Twitter, what's your Twitter handle?
Ah, yes, it's at Moni Guzman. So Moniguzman. I'm all over the internet with that handle.
Okay.
Not hard to find.
Okay, and I am at Robert Writer,
Mhm.
Wrighter on Twitter. And thank you so much. The book is called I Never Thought of It That Way: How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. You're doing God's work, so keep it up.
All right. Thanks, Bob. This was great.
Thank you.